Hi, everyone. This is Daniel Lyons. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about what it is that this ministry does. This ministry is not a religion. It is not based on any particular religion other than Christianity, that we are followers of Christ. A lot of things that will be taught here are unfamiliar to most people, and a lot of people will try to associate it as being that of another religion. Some will say that, oh, it comes from this religion, that religion, or another, but it's not. It is a product of several years of research, a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, and a lot of hardships that have come through my life that led me to seeking and questioning to find out what was really being said, because I noticed there was a type of pattern that seemed to be appearing in the Bible over and over, and I couldn't quite make out what it was. And there was something that was not quite right in a lot of the religious pursuits that I had tried, and it seemed like something was missing, and I'd heard a lot of things that didn't quite add up. And I noticed that from one church to another church, things didn't add up, and even people in the same congregations had problems seeing the same way. And I started noticing that there was something off. And like, imagine you have, well, let's think about, for most people, we consider a lot of people are afraid of the devil, and because they're afraid of the devil, they're afraid he's going to kill them. But in consideration, think, how many people in the Bible did the devil actually kill? But then consider, how many people did God kill? And the number is astronomical. In fact, I can't even remember a single instance where the devil killed anyone. But yet we're taught over and over that the devil is this person who's stalking you and trying to kill you. I don't know how that works out to being that. I've never seen it, but it also talks about in the book of John that God is love. And so if God is love, how does love do all these horrendous things and have us create wars and so forth? And as I started uncovering what there was a kind of sign language of the soul that was happening here. It was like using symbols and allegories of living people to create a hidden truth that is about you. And it's not that you, when you read the book, you're actually reading about yourself. Though it's talking about real people and real places on the planet Earth, God is using these people, his chosen people, to create a lineage of truth that it has become a manual to peace. But only by knowing how to read it properly will you see how the manual comes out. And I've gone through several lessons so far showing how the manual changes from one to another. But you have to also know how, not just the words and the root of the words or how the words are used. I mean, you have to understand that if you are looking at the world as though it is your soul, your understanding, it is your all attributes of your consciousness, and that you have to learn how to create dominion over that inner world. And by creating dominion over this inner world, that you will learn to reflect God on the outside. So he's teaching you how to do a process of creating balance within yourself to create wholeness. The word is peace, or shalom. Shalom does not mean, to feel good and be happy. It means to be whole and complete. And so we're learning to be whole and complete. And so if you're, say you're holding the world, no longer are you looking up to God at this particular point, because this is what most religions teach us. They teach us that we are unworthy and that we have to basically to offer sacrifices of ourselves to gain favor with God. And it's not about gaining favor with God. It's about finding truth within yourself, and through truth, you will, from the overflow of your love and peace and understanding, will emulate God, and in thus emulating God, it will flow out to the rest of the world. And this is what true Christianity comes out to being. Is it's not about a religion, it's not about your doctrine, it's not about piousness. It is about that when you have correction that is added to you, righteousness means to be correct. It has become a very religious word, so therefore we think it means to be very pious and to do things a very certain way. But that is just, it is a process, and through the process that we learn to find understanding, and through correctness we know the right path in which to follow, and through this path we become a reflection of God. That's why Christ tells us that he says, I no longer call you servants. Well, he's not about making you a servant to the law or the truth. He's about making you a friend of God. And to be a friend of God is to be as more like an equal, not to be that you're going to be a God. It's not that you're going to be a deity in any way, shape, or form. It is that you emulate him with yourself. And some of the things that helps to understand is that like most of us believe that we are built in God's image from the time we were born. We have gone through on the several days of creation and showed that though on day 3 it talks about trees, and day 6 it says, let us make man in our image. If you go over to the next chapter and go through verses 4 through 9, you see that before the trees were made, that God created man from the earth, and not until day 6 does he become created in the image of God. And that's because the days of creation represent stages of development. The last several lessons we've done have gone through and explained these steps. At least the first 3. We're into the 3rd day right now. It's a slowly time-consuming process to explain it, just because there's foundations that need to be laid, and there's a lot of things that we've been taught that kind of need to be reorganized. It's almost like as if you have everything that you know has been written on a chalkboard, and so you kind of have to erase the chalkboard. It'll leave an impression of what was there, but through that impression we can build upon, and we can write anew what needs to be seen, to be able to understand what God is actually saying. Because a lot of people suffer. We suffer every day with fear, confusion. Control is one of the biggest things that we have. Control means it's a process of not letting go, not moving, staying still. But the Bible is actually talking about a growth process, and in growth, that's where we find God. It's all through opposition. In fact, fire is a big issue in the Bible. Fire represents basically it's light, but it's also, so it is thus illumination, but it also burns. But to not be burned by it, you have to be refined by it. That's why you see the Bible talks a lot of times about metals being refined and the dross being removed, or things being consumed in the fire, or if not using fire, it uses like stone being chiseled, thus it's being refined. So it's a refining process. And in fact, the burning bush, the bush comes from a word meaning to either hedge and also of thorns. And so that is an impassable barrier that is a burning bush. And so it is like enlightenment is brought about through opposition. In fact, you'll notice a lot of times in life that some of the greatest things come from opposition. We'll say like a pearl. A pearl is created after many years of a grain of sand being lodged into an oyster, and the oyster, through the irritation, creates this beautiful pearl. And or if you take we'll say a diamond goes through much pressure and time and heat to create from coal into to being something precious. In fact, you hear it many times in the Bible, and talks about heaping burning coals upon somebody's head. It's an old expression. Technically, it means that the coal is of the mind. It's the filth of the mind, the corruptibility that's within you. And through the process of the pressures and enlightenment, it burns away the filth and reveals the diamond soul underneath. So basically, it is a process of by heaping living truth, living coals upon the mind, that it creates clarity of understanding. And so when you do something good, it represents creating a clarity within yourself. So we're going through a refining process. It's a testing process. And so every time you see fire, we're actually talking about refining and enlightenment. And so like even, we'll say grapes as they grow on a vine, fruit in general. If fruit is always given water, is always giving nourishment, it's not very sweet. But if you have times of drought. The drought, for some reason, creates more concentration of sweetness. And so the sweetest wine comes from those that struggled on the vine. And so it's about opposition. And in fact, if we look at the name of Israel, let's go ahead and I'm going to do a quick screen share. And I think this might be useful for us. We're going to go ahead and go to a website. It's my favorite website. I use it all the time. It's called theblueletterbible.org. It's a great study tool. It is not associated in any way, shape, or form with this ministry. I just, I love it for its attributes it has. And let's see, where are we going? Okay, so we have Blue Letter Bible, and I'm going to go to oh, shoot, I just got completely sidetracked on where I was heading because I had another screen that I had open at the time. Well, that's impressive because I'm live right now and I can't fix that. So anyhow, I'm going to try to get that one back, and I got a lot on my plate right now. Basically, what you see around is that we're pretty soon you're going to see all this is going to start disappearing in the next week or so. Teresa and I are going to go ahead and move from this location. Our lease is up and they raised the rate, and being that it's just her and I, she's the primary breadwinner. I've been putting a lot of time into the research and hoping that we can make something of this ministry. It's been a hard uphill battle to try to get people to understand or to come to want to realize that there is something more, because most people don't want change. They have what's called cognitive dissonance. Whenever something new comes up, they try to find ways to reassociate it with something else so that they don't have to face it. And so regardless of all the opposition, Teresa and I believe strongly in what we're doing here. And so we're dedicated to this, but it is financially tight. We don't get donations from anybody. We had a few early on for a few dollars. Teresa's running an Etsy shop, trying to, instead of just asking for money, trying to sell products so that we can fund the ministry. But as it is, things have gotten a little tighter, so we have to, we're moving from this place to a less expensive one so that we can try to save some money so that we can keep the ministry going. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to do this, but I apologize the videos aren't more impressive, but the information should make a huge difference for you. Okay, so, oh yeah, that's right. I was going to go to look at the name Israel. I know if I talk long enough, it would come back. So let's look at the word Israel. Israel. All right, type it at the top there. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn to the Strong's concordance numbers at the top there. And this shows us the original Hebrew. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the name Israel. Now remember, we start off with Israel's name is Jacob. Jacob means supplanter. It means to basically to grab the heel. But to grab the heel means to like change a step, to withhold what was there and to switch it. So it's about change. But change, thus Jacob becomes Israel. So change thus becomes what here you see it says God prevails, right? But it is not just God prevails. We can look at the word for God in this particular moment, at this point, and actually this one is, sorry, this one is what they're using for prevails. Comes from contend, have power, contend with, persist, exert oneself, persevere. And so the name Israel is actually about exerting yourself, being persistent, and perseverance. Life is about a journey. It's like you've heard this before. This has become common knowledge, so it's not new to you. But life really is a journey, and that's what Exodus is about, is that journey. And also, if you see the other part of Israel, El means God, but it also technically it just means strength or might or power. So if we take the strength of or power of God, we're going to see that it is basically infusing your persistence, your willingness to keep moving forward, your ability to prevail. There was Israel the man, but then there was Israel the kingdom or the people, and so the nation. And if we remember from the other studies we've had, that a person is a thought or belief. And if you have thoughts like people gather into very similar understandings, and so they are ruled by a single ruler or king, and the king is generally a higher ideal or an ideal of that single consciousness. And so each of these are a state. Your thoughts and people are basically the same thing. They're comparatively to each other, and so they create a state of understanding. And so the nation of Israel is now a kingdom of perseverance. So it's a state of being that is persistent at overcoming. And so it's through the opposition that we gain strength and that we grow stronger. And you look at it also when we're going through the days, that each day represents, it comes from the word meaning a period, a stage of development, or as we saw in Deuteronomy, it was sandals representing steps or balance. And so each day is a period of enlightenment. The day is also compared to fire. And so fire tests the mind, that all things are being tested by the fire, that it's through opposition. In fact, if you look at the story of Job, where it talks about that the devil shows up and that he is he's talking with the Lord, and the Lord is, asking, where have you been? He's like, oh, here, there, wherever else. It's because he represents restlessness. He represents a side of yourself that is in opposition. Thus, he comes as an antichrist, that which is in the opposition of truth. And so basically, it's self-relating versus persevering, keeping to what you've known versus progressing. And so he thus becomes slanderous, because he's like, it represents your self opposition. And so if you notice that he has a purpose, God doesn't make mistakes. God doesn't create something just because he wants to create something and oops, I made a mistake. The truth is that it has a purpose, that opposition is what drives you. If you had no opposition, you wouldn't be tested. It's kind of like going to a blacksmith. The Bible has compared Christ to a blacksmith a few times, and that basically that if the blacksmith, if he just made a sword and put it in the fire and then just pounded it and let it cool, it'd become brittle. I mean, even if it didn't even, the crafting process requires more than just fire. It requires the fire of testing. It requires the pounding and the opposition that you have. So it's not just being enlightened, but it's being testing that enlightenment and then being put back into the water, and the water represents spirit, and the spirit represents truth, and the truth is what cools you down and makes what you believe and what you know, what you learn, to become a part of you, to become stronger. And so that it's a repeated process of being illuminated, being tested, and then being reflecting back on the self. And when you reflect back on the self, then it becomes a part of you. And then that sword becomes a sword of truth that comes forth. It's the word of God that is the truth that has been tested within you, and from the overflow of what has come within you comes without. And that is something that will well, as you could compare it to the stories of King Arthur, Arthur represents that of Adam that drew the sword of truth, the unbreakable truth, the unbreakable sword from the stone, or the stone also represents that of belief, that we've drawn an unbreakable truth from the stone that that helps to rule the land, because the land and Arthur are one. Adam is of Adama, meaning the earth. And so we are as Adama, or as the clay, as the golem, as the Yiddish call it, that is being brought forth into enlightenment. And we're taking that primitive beast self and raising it up to being as a man. In fact, if you take a look at, like I have a dog, he's laying here next to me, and my Teresa and I, we joke constantly about how he is so much like the primitive self. Everything he does is about feeding his hungers or playing or just any kind of amusement or self-gratification. He's adorable, but it's all chaos all the time. And so it's about, if say you have a stray dog, then you really like this dog and you want this dog to be a part of you, right? And so you call to it. Now the dog has an option for the moment you call to it. It can stay a wild animal and ignore you, or it can be aware of your presence. And it's like us becoming aware of God's presence. And once you become aware, you now have a choice. You face a choice. Do I go and be as I have always been, filled with chaos and trying to fulfill my own desires? Or do I come closer to my would-be master? And in coming closer to the would-be master, you become more like your master. And so in the coming closer, you learn to be subject to that control, to the point that you too become as a master. And so that's the point of what God's trying to do with us, is that he's trying to take the beast away from us, taking the primitive self, and create enlightenment so that we may mirror him, so that we may be a reflection of him. And in fact, when you look at the tabernacle meeting, outside the tabernacle meeting, there was a lavar. The lavar was what you used to wash, and there was a sacrifice that needed to be made, fire, and then through the refinement you came and you washed, and the washing was in water, but it was calm water, and water creates that reflection. We also know that as that firmament of truth, that which we reflect in, the mirror of truth. And so by reflecting within, we see the truth without. And so in fact, the lavar was made of the bronze mirrors of the women that served the temple. We learned also earlier that women represent wisdom, as men represent ideas and belief. Women represent wisdom, and the wisdom is self-relating. How do I use the information I've gained? So therefore, is how do I take something and apply it to myself? And so, but they were made of the bronze mirrors. The mirrors represent to be reflection, just as the water is, and also they're made of bronze. Bronze means biblically, symbolically, means both to be strong and also of mixing. So of taking multiple concepts, relating them to each other, you gain the strength of self-reflection, and thus you are cleansed so that you may enter the holy place. So basically, so what we're seeing is that there is a process of gaining enlightenment, that we're all trying to gain enlightenment, and this enlightenment is constantly tested, and that we all face that burning bush, that impassable barrier that is testing us and trying to make us persevere to gain higher understanding. And so the whole process is about gaining higher understanding. And we will all face opposition in our lifetime. In fact, each one of us is trying to create Christ within. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at another passage in the Bible, see if this maybe helps a little. Let's look at, let's go to Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. I'll go ahead and bring that up on my shared screen. Let's see, Matthew. Okay, and I'll go to Matthew 4. All right, in Matthew 4, we've talked about some of these things before. Now, the devil at this point, we can turn on the Strongs if you want. Hopefully it won't confuse you too much. I'll go ahead and try and zoom the screen a little better so you can read it with me. All right. And so then Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. This particular version of the wilderness is basically to be loneliness, or have nothing else around. Often when it talks about a desert or a wilderness or dryness, it's talking about to remove the moisture around you, to remove the obscurity around you so that clarity may come through. And so that you may be tempted, in other words, to be tested of the devil. In this particular point, the devil represents, it says slander or accuser. And so basically it is your own self-accusation, because we're reading it from the point of I am the master of my inner world, and at this point I am trying to find out how to master myself. I'm creating Christ within, or Jesus within. The name for Jesus, I'm going to go ahead and click on that real quick. Jesus, his name is Jehovah is salvation, but from Hebrew, Yosis comes out to being Yehoshua or Joshua, and the name actually comes out to being the existing one. That's where we got God. to be, to become, come to pass, to exist, happen. So this is what is that same creating of the self, the creating of your truth, that perseverance, that you are to exist and to become this particular person. And also it means to be saved or to be delivered. So it is the coming salvation that is coming to you. Christ is identified many times throughout, especially the New Testament, as being truth. Also, we consider it the living word. Word is speaking of truth, and the truth is become embodied in flesh. So it is a truth that frees you from your past beliefs, and that we are creating order within. So we are creating salvation or freedom within ourselves. And so the freedom within you, or the truth, is being tested of the of opposition. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterwards hungry. Now, we can look at 4 in one of the next sessions coming up when we get to the 4th day of creation. But it represents that of intelligence and enlightenment, and that of creating a type of order through it. And then afterwards he was hungered. Now, whenever you consume something, it becomes a part of you, and therefore it becomes the strength of you. And so in this particular case, to be hungry means to seek understanding, that you may consume as though knowledge, that it may become a part of yourself to add to your strength. All right, and he was tempted, and the tempter came to him and said, if thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. Now, son comes from the word meaning to, in Hebrew it's ben. Ben comes from the root word benan. It says the same exact definition, means to build. Of the house the son builds. So this particular case, it means to build, to be built of, and then God. And this one is using, the Old Testament was using, early on was using Elohim, which meant plurality and judgment. But now at the New Testament, it becomes theos in Greek, which means one God, one divine God. So basically, your multiple judgments at this particular point have solidified into one solid truth. And so you are built of the higher truth. So the truth is built of these things. You'll see it's also, he's the Son of Man. Man represents thoughts or beliefs. So your primitive self is built up, and also the higher self is built to create balance in between. And so the Son of God commanded that these stones become bread. Now, each person is the same as a stone. A stone is a belief, and the beliefs are being tested. When the Bible talks about that, of these stones of, I can raise up seeds of Abraham, he's talking about that I can bring up the children of the higher understanding. Or in this particular case, it would be like, that let all beliefs be made bread. In the Old Testament, the word for flesh meant, if you look at Adam and Eve, is that if you take, well, we'll come back to the screen here. When you had Adam and Eve, it says that that man will join to woman, and they will become one flesh. Man represents thought or belief. It is an active, progressive action. Woman is a self-reflective wisdom. You see that in all the books of the Psalms about the 2 women that are wisdom. And so man thoughts join to the self, and in the self brings forth children, which brings forth understanding that you build your understanding with. And so they become one flesh. The one flesh, flesh comes from the word, I can't remember the actual word right now, but the root of it means good news or teachings or declaration. So basically, thought and the self become one understanding. And so Christ also uses the same explanation, that the bread is the self, that he eat of my flesh, eat of this truth, eat of this understanding, and then you become as Christ, because you are gaining the ideal truth that sets us free. Remember, the soul is psyche, or the mind, and so it is the entire mind, and so that we are trying to create freedom of the mind, salvation of the mind, frees us from the self-imprisonment that we all live within, or as we can call it, arrested development, where we do not progress beyond a certain point. We are stuck in a single state all the time. And if you are not growing, if you are not progressing, then you are dying. And that's all there is to it. If something like if a plant doesn't grow, it dies. And so if you are not progressing, if you are not growing constantly, then you are dying. It's like that sword I was talking about that becomes this unbreakable truth. If this sword was not tested the first time that it was tested and wielded in the hands of a master, we'll say Christ himself uses you as though an instrument of truth, and that he tries to wield you, and the first time that you come into opposition, you'll shatter on contact and you become useless. So it's only through the more testing, the harder that you've had to endure to try to gain understanding, therefore you become an embodiment of pure unbreakable truth. So anyhow, we're going to go ahead and look back at the Christ being tempted. All right, and so basically it's saying that these beliefs, stones, become understanding. All right, so these stones have now become understanding. But he answered, said unto him, it is written, a man shall not live by bread alone. So not just by your basic truths, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So not only are we to live by not by our own understanding, but by of the higher understanding. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on the pinnacle of the temple. Now remember, a city represents any clustering of truths that have been gathered together, like beliefs become a particular unity that creates a state of understanding. So he's taken him to a higher understanding, that in the pinnacle of the temple, that now the stones of yourself are being refined, and once they're refined, they turn into a temple. So that's why the Bible talks about us being a temple of living stones, that we are living beliefs, living concepts that build upon each other. And it doesn't necessarily mean we're dealing with the inside world. So at this particular point, we're talking about that it is the higher understanding, that he took them to the highest state of his understanding, and said unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou shalt dash thy foot against a stone. So basically he's saying that if you stop the progression, at least on the inner version of yourself, that if you stop your progression now, if you just give up and deal with what you have, if you stay the way you are, everything will be fine. You will not be tripped up. Everything is perfect. And in fact, there's a big mystery that most people do not understand. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. This is a huge mystery, is that the New Testament, especially the Gospels are about a choice. If you look to the story of in the book of Luke, it talks about Elizabeth and Zacharias. Elizabeth's name means the sevenfold oath. She is a promise that we had, or you could say a covenant if you want to, but this 7-day progression that we're doing is actually the entire theme throughout the Bible. Just as I said that man was created on the 3rd day, technically you are not completed until the 6th day, where you cross over into the 7th, which represents to have peace within, to be wholeness within yourself. So we're trying to create that 7-day process, and that 7-day process does not actually complete until the end of the Bible. The whole process you see in between is actually running between that 3rd to 6th day. And so we're learning how to find that peace within ourselves. That's why when you get to the book of Revelations, it has this repetition of 7, 7, 7, 7 churches, 7 plagues, 7 bowls, 7, because basically it's a refining process that's removing all the final stages of yourself that have not transcended into higher enlightenment. And so at this particular point, when Christ appears, it is as though you have, from the Old Testament, it's talking about that you have built up this lineage of truth, but the truth has not brought forth the fruit of what you had expected it to be. In fact, when the Pharisees had met Christ, they did not recognize him as being the King of Kings because they thought he was being this king of the world outside, and he is, but they could not recognize that. But he also represents truth, and so the truth is what rules the kingdoms of the soul, all your different states of understanding. Once they are ruled, you reflect God as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and you become thus a reflection of him. And so he is the King of Kings, but people didn't recognize the truth for what it is. And so we let's see where we at here on this. So we're going to go ahead and come back and take a look. Oh, let me finish what my thought. Again, I'm a little distracted today. I also tend to be a little bit absent-minded every now and then too. But so the whole New Testament, we're talking about Elizabeth, and she is the promise, and she's married to Zacharias, and he is, I believe that's Zacharias, and his name means remembrance of God. It can be remembered by God or to remember God. And so you had a promise that was unfulfilled, and thus the old promise, because Elizabeth and her husband were both old, so the promise is old and it is barren. It does not bring forth the fruits of the labors that you've done. And so it becomes then a promise that is unfulfilled, that is trying to transition or to transcend beyond a certain point. It is one thing to have the rules and to have them all dedicated to a certain point, but you have to at some point make a choice. And the word, when you get to the cross, if you look at the word for cross, so I'm going to go ahead and just share that because it's kind of amazing to see it. And we don't think twice of it because it doesn't seem like much. So we'll come back to Matthew 4 later. I'm going to type in the word cross here. And make sure to have your Strong's number turned on the top. And in the New Testament, you'll see that the word cross, and we know that it's a tree, but at this particular point, it uses the word cross, right? And it just means a cross, as you know, is what Christ is crucified on. But symbolically, he's telling you something more amazing. It comes from the root word meaning to cause or make a stand, to make a stand, to place or to put or to set, but it is to make to stand. You're going to make a stand here. You have a cause in which you're going to stand for. And so at this particular point, we are now, at some point, you have a choice that you have to make. Do we choose between Barabbas or do we choose between Christ? Barabbas means like son of a master. So basically, do we stay a slave? Do we stay believing that we are entitled to what we believe, to what we're given, like as the Jews did at the time, is they believed that they had become entitled, that we are God's chosen people, not realizing that you were chosen because the language that you create and the lineage of your life, these chosen people created this lineage of truth. And so God chose them to tell future generations a greater story of truth to find peace within. And so we now have this transitional change where you have to make a choice. Do I stay a slave? Do I stay imprisoned? And what you're being imprisoned to is judgment. And judgment is the biggest enemy that you ever had. Because when we started with the book of, with Adam and Eve, they were naked. That means they were it's like unaware of your shameful nature. But once you become aware, you try to hide your shame. And so the Bible gives us garments. And the garments have two different meanings. There's an outer garment and an inner garment. The outer garment generally represents your animal side. It's usually an animal skin, animal hair, something along that line. And this is my nature. This is the spiritual attribute I represent. You see it in all kinds of nations with their coat of arms or the kung fu, with what animal spirit do I closest relate to. And so that is what is my nature versus my inner truth, which is made of usually fine linens. And in the fine linens that represents the truth which hides my shame. And so the truth which covers me from my ignorance, my innocence, or nakedness. And so, in fact, when you look at those that have transcended, and it talks about in the Bible that they only have no longer an outer coat because you have shed your beast self. You've shed that animal nature, but have only embodied the truth, and so they're covered with the fine tunics. White fine tunics too, so it means basically to be purified in truth and understanding. And so we have learned to overcome and to transcend from our primitive self into a higher self. And so we have clothed ourselves in the garments of righteousness, or the garments of truth, or that which is of true understanding. In fact, if you look at the story of Christ, when they had divvied up his garments, the under tunic, that one that I was just talking about, a lot of times they say, oh, it's just the underwear, but it's not. Just it literally says under tunic, and it is woven from the top down without seam. In other words, it is a perfect truth that has been given from God to the lower self, from the higher self to the lower self, that it is a perfect, seamless truth that is there to cover your shame. They said, let us not divide it, but let us cast lots to see who it belongs to. And they're four soldiers. And consider the path the Bible has taken. The Bible, basically, it has it starts in Egypt, and Egypt we go to Jerusalem, so we travel eastward, basically to find enlightenment. From enlightenment, the New Testament is then written in Greek, and it is taken back over to the West, and of the West we end up in Rome, where the Bible had been kept for many years, but it was actually solidified and canonized down back in Alexandria, Egypt. So it creates kind of a square that of all these truths, that what does the Bible thus belong to? Because if you notice, there are attributes of each one of those religions. They all have the zodiacs. They all have similar attributes that happen throughout them, and they are the process the Bible has followed through, that God is showing you of the square. And the square is a very powerful thing. We'll look at how that comes out in one of the next on day 4. But of those soldiers, of these 4 mighty things that we have, or we could say the mind, body, spirit, and soul, that those things have all created the inner truth, and we must not divide it, but to let it be sorted through a natural progression. And so let's go ahead and go back and look at our story in Matthew of the devil tempting Christ. And Jesus said, let's see, where do we go? Oh, we're in the wrong chapter here. Where did I go? Oh, so with the cross, we have to make a stand. We have to choose. Do we want to stay as Barabbas? Do we want to stay connected to our own beliefs? That with Adam and Eve, I had cut way off a track on that. With Adam and Eve, we were stuck in judgments, because from Adam and Eve eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's not about knowledge itself. It is knowledge of good and evil. Good and evil creates, knowing these things creates judgment. And in your judgment, you are thus become a prisoner to your judgments. And most of us right now, every single choice you make is locked into a struggle of the judgments that you have created. When I like something or dislike something, love or hate, they're all based on my own judgments of what I think. Instead of seeing others as a reflection of ourselves, we see only ourselves. And it's like looking into a mirror, and if only you see yourself in the mirror, the judgment you have of yourself is so crucial and so critical that you measure everyone else upon your own measure of yourself. And so you cannot transcend, you cannot cross over to that reflection of God on the other side, because your judgment divides you. The truth within you is what divides you from crossing over, from transitioning from this understanding to the next. And so you are set at the cross, and you must die at the cross, that your truth that you had must be let go. You have to let go at some point, so that you may transition from death into life, that you may transition from your old self to your new self. And this is a renewal of the Spirit. This represents the baptism of going down and then rising up. It is a constant that I take up my cross daily. I die daily, that I am renewed daily, because I have decided that I have joined to the higher understanding that I control nothing. And if I control nothing, then why am I trying so hard to do it? Because if I'm trying so hard to control what is uncontrollable, then I am living a lie, and I cannot progress. I must learn to move beyond self-control, or not necessarily self-control, but trying to control the world. It's like, imagine we'll use that couple again, and you have a man and a woman that are joined together as one flesh, one understanding, one truth. If these people are trying to bring forth a baby, bring forth seed. The tree is bringing forth seed or progeny, or to say to bring forth new understanding. So if a man and a woman are trying to have a child, in the process, there is joy, there's happiness, there is that effort to endeavor, that effort to proceed. But if you stop trying, if you lose that purpose and you've now become infertile and you cannot get beyond this particular step, what happens to a marriage or a relationship that has been so dedicated to trying to bring forth new life that the people feel incomplete without having a child, and that they're so lost because they had expectations, and I expected that I was going to gain results through the actions I did. I thought I was going to have this happen. In fact, the Bible talks about that being the story of manna, not manna. What is it? Mammon, where the Bible talks about that to do not have trust in mammon, or basically it's talking, people think it means money because it uses money, but it means confidence. Do not have so much confidence that what happens in the end is going to be the end, that you are going to get the results that you always expect. It is about the endeavor. It's about the persistence. It is about striving for the goal, running for the goal, but it doesn't say anything about crossing the goal. Run for the goal, as Paul says, that you will gain a crown of victory. Run towards the goal, but do not expect that you're going to gain eternal life. Do not expect that you're going to gain all the understanding or gain the prize, because in that pursuit of expectation, you are setting yourself up for fail. It is to run with all your heart, to discipline your body, to run for the goal, but it is not the goal that is the victory. It is the gaining of the journey. Remember, it's like a snowball. You start with a single point. From one point, you draw to another point. If I move that snowball from here to here, it does not stay the same size. That snowball grows and becomes the sum of the journey. And so it is not about the destination. It is about the journey itself. And so when you have expectations, you try to say, I want to control everything, or I have expectations of how I expect it to come out. That is the recipe for destruction. That is the recipe for creating that failure within yourself. So like that couple that are trying to come together to create a child, instead of enjoying the process, they actually get stuck in between, and then the loss of the expectation, they become frustrated, and oftentimes the couple will either separate or become very depressed. And so this is your soul. Your soul is a house, and your house is joining to a process, and you're enjoying the process. But when you don't get the results that you want, then oftentimes everything falls apart, and we fall into a pit of despair. It's like as if you're sitting in your living room and a hole just opened up and swallowed you up. And so you'll notice that this happens all the time with people, that you're in a certain state, you think things are perfect, I am good how I am, but then all of a sudden this pit opens up and you're flailing, or like a drowning man, and you're falling, and so your whole life becomes out of whack. You'll see this if you were in a good relationship, or you thought was a healthy relationship, and there was some kind of something had gone wrong. Instead of being able to progress beyond it, you stay stuck in that particular spot, and then there's this hole inside you that you're trying to fill with everything, but you can't fill it because there's only one thing will fill it, and that's to find that peace, that which you had desired originally. And most people are stuck in that one state of this empty hole that they're just filling with all kinds of foolish things to try to fill what cannot be filled with things themselves. And only until you have gone down into that pit and cast light in there to see what's causing the problem, then you will have the understanding, cast the light on the demon, to name the demon. This demon is that my self-pride, or my faulty beliefs, or whatever it is that was haunting you. When you can cast it, you can see it, you can deal with it, and when you can deal with it, then you are freed from it, and then therefore the house has become cleaned. Instead of being a place of darkness, it has become a place of light. But at some point, you're going to have to address the deepest parts of you. And so at some point, you are going to face this cross. You're going to have many crosses you come across. But the one main one is that we have been building up this lineage of Christ, and we have now gotten to the point where we have we want to overcome, but it is become barren. It is something that has not been able to allow us to transcend. We've not been able to soar, because we have not allowed ourselves to fall. Only in the surrender to the fact that we cannot progress until we lose our judgments. Not judgment in general, the whole process of learning how to be wise, but you will know that eventually that all things are a reflection of yourself. All things show that you are a reflection of God, that all things, that your judgments of others are foolish and wrong because you cannot control them. They are actually just attributes that you can see in yourself. And we hate other people or other things because they're attributes of ourselves that we don't like. And so we cast our judgment, we cast our stones, we cast our beliefs at them. And then therefore we're trying to destroy those things because they remind us of ourselves. And so only in losing that judgmental state, only in calming ourselves and knowing that we cannot control it, only in that point can we then transition from the lower self to the higher self. Can we transcend the waters that were the roaring seas? Only then can we cross over from the mirror, from death into life. And as the book of Revelations talks about, that those that had transcended, or those who had crossed over from through the tribulation, through the troubles, have walked on a sea of glass. And that is the reflecting mirror, that you have transcended the impassable mirror of truth from death into life. And so that's what we need to do, is that at some point you're going to reach that cross, and the cross means to make a stand. And do I choose Barabbas, or do I choose Christ? Do I stay as I am? Do I stay as a slave, mastered by my own self, my own understanding, and live here? Do I dwell here? And they talked about Barabbas being both a robber and an insurrector and all these things. It's you. It's your inability to progress, your inability to let go. And only in that choosing freedom, choosing Christ, which means to be free, choosing truth that sets me free, in that particular case, then I will transcend, and then I will overcome the cross, and I will rise again, and I will ascend as Christ ascends. And so that's where we're stuck in that particular point. And so I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it was a truth that needed to be shared. Today I kind of decided I was going to go with this whole lesson as being led by the Spirit. And last night I had trouble sleeping. I was just really filled with a need to share with people, because I don't know if people are understanding what it is that's being shared here. And I know so many people don't want to spend time to learn and time to read. But if we look, when it tells us that, and he said unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. If you are built of a higher understanding, stop. Cast yourself down, for it is written, the angels have charge over thee, and their hands shall bear thee up, lest any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. You won't be tripped up. If you give up now, if you stop trying to be the higher understanding, stop trying to excel, you will be fine. You will not lose any of your beliefs, any of your thoughts will not be lost. But Jesus said unto him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Consider this also being that, imagine these being real people that these stones are. He's saying if you cast yourself down, no one gets lost. No thoughts get lost. No beliefs get lost. Nobody gets left behind. No soul is taken from you. But Jesus said to him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And again the devil taketh him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. Now again, this is opposition, is the devil. It is your own opposition that is trying to keep you, it's tempting you so that you may stop your progression to an exceedingly high mountain. If all these stones, if all these beliefs came together, they create a mountain. And the mountain is it is a caste system, an order, or a government, so to speak, of your understanding, that all these beliefs start from slaves at the bottom and work their way up through to the powerful and mighty until we get to the point of the king, which rules it all. And so you get a triangle. So consider that you have 3 points of a triangle, or we have, at this point, we have gone through 3 days of creation, that a single point is enlightenment. And from this point of enlightenment, we have a line. And so two points. So day 2 is of the water, the firmament itself. The firmament is a straight and narrow path. If we consider that it is going this way versus this way this time, that if we have it this way, that over to one side is righteousness and the other side is foolishness. I guess if I did it for your view, because you're seeing it backwards, that'd be righteousness versus foolishness. But as the right hand represents righteousness, therefore it is called right. It is correct versus left, left over, left behind. So we have a straight and narrow path that is called balance. And in balance, we must try to find out how to not sway from the path, from the straight and narrow path. The straight and narrow path is not being pious. Straight and narrow means balance. To go off to the right means to go off into seeking over righteousness. These were the Pharisees and the Sadducees that were so consumed with being so righteous and so correct that they were killing people, not understanding that people are reflections of yourself. And so to be overly righteous is to be foolish, and to be overly foolish, obviously, is to be foolish. And so you cannot be out of balance as the devil is out of balance. That accuser and slander, he's over there telling you, he's called the accuser because who are you to think that you can get anywhere? Who do you think you come to God? You are unworthy. Yet the same person is over there tempting you in the shadows. You deserve this. You deserve to have these things. No one needs to know. This is all for you, buddy. Psh, hey, you know. And so Christ is not either one of these, that he is balanced. And this is the sword of truth, the line. If you look at the books of the Bible, the first one is Genesis, to begin, the inception of truth. From inception, we have choices. Choices are a line that are a balance that we must make many choices to get from one point to another. And so we have a line. This is the firmament. And from the firmament, we create, we build up we gather. The third day is Leviticus. Leviticus means to join. And if we join, this is the ruling if you notice, it's a book about ruling that of the world. And so we have taken 3 points now that has become a kingdom, a mountain. And so we have taken from one point to the second to the third. This is the mind, the spirit, and the body. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or Father, Spirit, and Son. And so these attributes are being built up into God's holy mountain. We also call that Mountain Zion, and Zion basically means it could be like a signpost. It means to create clarity. And so we'll look back at this final part of this lesson. It says, and the devil taketh him up to an exceedingly high mountain. So a high understanding. This is all the kingdoms of the world, all the understanding that you have gained, all the states of your enlightenment have been within you, and of the world. And the world here, look at the world. The world is cosmos. Cosmos means the order of things. You use it for the universe and whatever else, but it's actually used of you, that the world is yourself. So to see all your judgments, all the things that you have come over, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Just stop progressing. Give in to the temptation to stay as you are. Stop the progression. You won't lose anything. Then saith Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. At this particular point, he's telling him, get behind me. Behind me is about, this is progression. Remember, Israel, to persevere, to keep progressing, and that you must not progress. And if you were on this path, the straight and narrow path to righteousness, the path that leads to ultimate truth, that anything that is not in front of you is behind you. You are the past. I will not be tempted by the way I was. I will face the cross. I will keep moving forward. I will find salvation. I will transcend the bitter spirit that I have been lost in for so long. And this is the lesson today. Join us next time as we go through, and we'll continue going through the 7-day process that leads us to salvation, to the New Jerusalem. I hope that I haven't lost you along the way. Please leave comments below. Please share this. Like I said, this ministry is it's myself and Teresa. You know, God has shown me some amazing things. I'm trying my hardest to share this with everyone, but I can't do it by myself. This takes all my time. Teresa's doing everything she can to try to make this work for us. I'm not used to not working long hours like I used to. I used to work in video games for years, but due to God has changed the path of my life. He's changed everything, and it's been an amazing ride. Nothing I expected, but it is in his hands now, and the hope is that we can keep these broadcasts going. The Bible is a very big book. There's a lot to learn. There's so much clarity that can still be shared, and so I'm hoping that you guys will stay with us and you know, check into some of the things that we offer. Maybe they might be beneficial to you, and that we may keep our ministry going with all the love I have. This is been a gift, a free gift to you. I can try to market this if I want to and sell it, but I'm trying to make this so that everyone has a piece of God's truth seen clearly, and the power of it is amazing. I've seen lives change through this. So please follow through with these steps, and I'll do everything I can to keep presenting them to you, and with great love. These things I pray. Amen.